I'm Peter Austin, that is an undecoded carrier pigeon message, and this is interesting. During the Second World War, all of the major nations used homing pigeons to send messages in some situations where communication via radio was either unavailable or likely to be intercepted by the enemy. The UK alone utilised around 250,000 birds in its National Pigeon Service, donated to the war effort by breeders from across the country. But this was nothing new. The practice actually dates back to the time of the ancient Egyptians. You see, pigeons have a remarkable natural ability to find their way home even after being taken over 1,000 miles away. Now, we don't actually fully understand how they're even able to do this. They might be navigating using the sun, or via their sense of smell, or by detecting the Earth's magnetic field, or a complex combination of any number of things, but whatever the case, this ability came in very handy during both world wars. Now, I've heard a few people say over the years that navigation abilities aside, how does the pigeon even know where it's supposed to be going? So I'm just going to quickly explain the basic principle of communicating via carrier pigeon. Military pigeon handlers kept the birds in a coop for several weeks until they accepted that location as their new home. That's just what pigeons do, apparently. The birds were then sent to the front lines or other critical locations, and then when the need arose, a message could be attached to an individual pigeon's leg and it would be released. All being well, it would instinctively fly straight back to its coop, perhaps hundreds of miles away, and the handlers could then forward that message on to any relevant recipients. Ingenious, really. It's no wonder we did it for so long. Of course, communication via pigeon did then start to fall into quite rapid decline in the decades following the Second World War and is now pretty much non-existent, but that didn't stop one particular member of Britain's National Pigeon Service from making the headlines far more recently. This is the story of pigeon NURP 40 TW194. In 2012, several national and international news outlets published a very intriguing story. Reportedly, back in 1982, a Mr. David Martin of Bletchingley, Surrey, had discovered the skeletal remains of a bird in his chimney whilst renovating his house. Not an unusual thing to find up a flue that hasn't been cleared out for a while, I'll grant you, except for one thing. Attached to the bird's leg was a small canister containing a note onto which was written a coded message. These were the remains of a World War II carrier pigeon that had sadly never made it home. Now, at the time of the discovery, Britain was fighting the Falklands War, and so government officials had rather more important things to do than try and crack a 40-year-old military code found up a Surrey chimney. But 3 decades later, curators at Bletchley Park, Britain's former code-breaking headquarters during World War II, realised how significant the find was, and forwarded the encrypted message on to GCHQ, Bletchley Park's modern-day equivalent, hence the story making the headlines in the 2010s rather than when the bird was first discovered in the 1980s. Now, despite the encryption, a few details were actually fairly clear from the outset. These 2 lines at the bottom of the sheet tell us that 2 copies of the message had been sent out via a pair of different pigeons, presumably to double its chances of arriving. It's thought that our chimney bird was the one known as NURP 40 TW194, meaning it was bred by the National Union of Racing Pigeons, hatched in 1940, probably in Twickenham, and was otherwise distinguished from its fellow hatchlings as number 194. The other bird, number 76, was also a Union pigeon, but was 3 years older, and is thought to have been from Dorking. We also know that the sender was a Sergeant W. Stott, because it just says that unencoded on the piece of paper, and as for the recipient, an excellent post by user Nick Pelling on cyphermysteries.com makes a very good case for X02 being an instruction to forward the whole thing on to the second of multiple addressees mentioned somewhere within the encrypted message. Identifying that addressee, though, requires the message itself to be deciphered. Now, having thoroughly examined the code, the experts at GCHQ were fairly confident that it's consistent with the one-time pad method of encryption, and I will now try to explain in very simple terms how that works. Wish me luck. So, both the sender and recipient have a matching notepad of pages containing a completely random series of letters, and they have pre-arranged a method of knowing which page in this notepad is to be used to encode and decode each message that is sent between them. Perhaps it's based on the date the message was sent, for instance. Now, for simplicity's sake, let's say that the sender is a massive fan of This Is Interesting on YouTube, excellent taste, and decides to make a complete mockery of the limited wartime resources by simply sending the letters TII to his friend back at the Pigeon coop. Oh, so wasteful. He'll be court-martialed for sure. But to encode that message in order to prevent the Germans from learning interesting things every 2 weeks, he converts the letters into a numerical value using a pre-agreed system. So again, for simplicity's sake, let's say it's A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, and so on, giving us 299 for TII. Now, I hear you, this on its own is incredibly easy to crack, especially if the enemy intercepts multiple messages over a long period of time using this exact system. So he then also takes the relevant page from his one-time pad with its random series of letters and does the same thing here. Now, we only need the first 3 letters for our example, so HOD becomes 8, 15, 4. At this point, he pairs those numbers off and adds them together, and in any instance where he's going to come to a value that's greater than 26, equivalent to the letter Z, the 26th letter of the alphabet, he just loops back to 1 and keeps on adding. This is called modular addition, but you don't need to know that. I promise it's not on the exam at the end. So 20 plus 8 gets you up to that 26 limit with 2 left over, so we loop back and just settle on 2. Then 9 plus 15 is 24, which is fine as it is, and likewise 9 plus 4 is 13, and that is pretty much it. He just turns that final string of numbers back into letters, so BXM, writes them down on a piece of paper, sticks it in a pigeon's leg canister, and sends them off flying home. And because the person back at the coop knows exactly which of the random sheets was used to encode the message, they can simply reverse the entire process. There's actually no mathematical way to decrypt an intercepted code without also getting your hands on the one-time pad itself and knowing which page to use. It simply can't be done. And the beauty of it, of course, is that only 2 people in the entire world need copies of any given one-time pad, making it far less likely to fall into enemy hands and far more disposable should it be compromised. However, it's because this method is so effective that we will probably never know just what was in the message carried by the bird Twickenham 194. And the poor thing isn't at all alone in that regard. Carrier pigeons were often fired upon by the enemy, hunted by trained hawks handled by military falconers, and caught by natural predators too. MI5 even culled wild birds of prey on the British coastline in order to give our pigeons the very best chance of making it back. Remarkably, it is estimated that 95% of all messages sent by carrier pigeon actually reach their destination, but with 250,000 birds serving Britain alone, that still accounts for losses in the thousands. It's hardly surprising then that in light of these dangers, 32 pigeons were decorated with the PDSA Dickin Medal, awarded for gallantry or devotion to duty while serving in military conflict. A number of them made it home despite having sustained terrible injuries on their journey, or delivered messages in the nick of time that resulted in hundreds of human lives being saved. And so with that in mind, I see this story as quite a positive one. Today we mostly remember those successful birds with the most heroic stories and the biggest medal collection, and understandably so, but thanks to the unique and mysterious circumstances surrounding the discovery of our pigeon, we can stop for just a moment and instead think of the many thousands of carriers who never made it home. Though we know so little about him or her, I sure hope that NURP 40TW194 and countless other birds just like it will be remembered alongside those medal winners for many more years to come. I've been Peter Austin, and that was interesting.